Hi, I'm Margaret Wooster. I'm here to talk to you today about the Great Lakes and a book that I've just finished writing called Meander and Biodiversity, part of the Birds on Niagara Festival. I am a regional planner, a watershed planner, have been most of my life. Um, so I used to work for the Erie and Niagara Regional Planning Board as a watershed planner, did a lot of groundwater protection work with local towns, the few that were still on groundwater. And I went from there to working as executive director of Great Lakes United, from there to Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper. I was a founder of that. And now I have been writing books. So I have two, Meander, Making Room for Rivers, and Living Waters, um, Reading the Rivers of the Great Lakes. And so this talk is going to be somewhat based on some of the information in those books, which I hope you'll buy at your local bookstore, Talking Leaves, or from SUNY Press, and we'll include a link to that. So I think I'm ready to share my screen. Let's see if I can do it. Okay, so I have about 22 slides to go through. And the theme of this is biodiversity in the Great Lakes, and based on really the water and what I know about the water of the Great Lakes and locally. So the first part here, the first 5 slides are really about the Great Lakes body, the physical nature of the Great Lakes. And they are a river. They started as a river. If you go back to the old maps, the sort of geology maps of the Great Lakes Basin, it was a river, and eventually ponded at the points where our 5 Great Lakes are today. And the flow is, sort of through Michigan, used to flow out this way, but now they all flow roughly this way and out the St. Lawrence River to the sea. And that's 700 miles right there. So you can see that the Great Lakes are big. It's a big basin. And you might even I think of it as the world's largest freshwater ecosystem, which it is, but also compare it to the Amazon rainforest as one important feature in the Western Hemisphere for the health of our entire planet. So the Great Lakes also a basin rimmed by glacial moraines, and this is where it starts getting good, because this map comes from the Great Lakes Atlas that has been republished many times, and an old friend of mine, Lee Botts, worked on that. And this is showing the different types of glacial moraines that surround and define the Great Lakes Basin. And one of the things about that, maybe the most important thing, is that these moraines really are the source of our water and of the water that's in the Great Lakes. And they are water. It's not just water, it's water holding structures. So, depending on the moraine, the different moraines have different yields, but they are water sources because as glacial deposits, they are sand and gravel and other things that hold water. And therefore, even though the Great Lakes is a river, it's often said that less than 1% of the water in the lakes makes it out to the sea in any given year. And the water really is, the hydrologic cycle is very much at play in the Great Lakes, where the water in the lakes is recirculating through evaporation and transpiration and rain and snow and precipitation back up to the edges of the bowl, where it infiltrates streams and also groundwater and aquifers, and eventually gets back down to the lakes again. So the water cycle is key to everything that happens here. I think that's all I need to say about that. This slide is my book. Kind of started with this slide. This is based on a book by Herman Fairchild called New York Physiography and Glaciology. And I think of it as an X-ray of Western New York. It was drawn by him and a bunch of students at the Rochester Academy of Sciences in New York. And it's based on structures that they were studying as glaciologists. And so this is like looking under the layer of soil and surface that we all know so well, and seeing what's going on a little bit underneath. So this is Western New York. These are our major tributaries to the Great Lakes, starting with Tonawanda Creek up here, which kind of runs off the map, Cayuga, Buffalo, Hunters, the east and west branch of Cazenovia, 18-mile south branch. All these creeks run basically northwest and end up coming, some of them through Buffalo or north into the Niagara River. And then there's one more down here, Cattaraugus, that flows almost due west and enters Lake Erie. You know, I don't know how far is Cattaraugus Creek from Buffalo, 20 or 30 miles south. So all of these hills, I mean, all of these streams and the hills that they're part of originate in this, well, we'll see in a minute, in this glacial aquifer. Oops. Oh. Okay, here we are. So again, this is the same, basically the same size and shape, the same kind of, this is the same territory we were just looking at, but now we see our same creeks, Tonawanda, Cayuga, Buffalo, Hunters, etc. We see them underlain by the groundwater, basically these moraine aquifers that really determine how much water we have in our area, in our Great Lakes. And in this case, or at least in the case of on the U.S. side of the border, our Great Lakes are the tributaries are something like 62% groundwater fed. So that is, I think it varies, but it's a large number. And 62% groundwater feeding into these rivers is what keeps the whole system alive. And it also is important because you can also see where things are vulnerable. And this is what we were doing when I worked with the Regional Planning Board on groundwater protection. There were a number of communities whose municipal water supplies were tapped into wells in the ground. And actually, we use this map and other maps like it to look for the high yield wells, and then to work with the communities if they had wells, if they had land uses like gas underground, gas tanks and things like that that were not compatible with your drinking water supply. We would work with them on doing their zoning so that they would avoid any aquifer recharge area. So the same guy who drew some of these maps also worked on mapping out the aquifers. Then in following these streams to their source, and that really was what I was doing in my book. I was following one particular creek to its source and trying to figure out what happened to it. I came to this area in Wyoming County. It's not far from Java Lake, which is why it's a prominent feature on all my maps. It's like sort of like a landmark. Java Lake is thought to be the source of Cattaraugus Creek, but Cattaraugus actually begins a little bit north of there, around here. Buffalo Creek begins around here, and Tonawanda Creek has two major tributaries sourced around this hill, this one and this one. And so this hill made of, I call it a hill made of water, because not only does it feed these three streams, three of our major streams, but also several streams that that flow west to the Genesee and then north to Rochester. So it is, it's a very, it must be this high yield aquifer that's right near that is part of the secret as to why this hill is so full of water. And when I have been there, I have been looking at the land uses and worried that there's a certain amount of factory farms up in here, and a lot of what you might call industrial agriculture, a lot of major land clearing and so forth. And it's over this, moraine, terminal moraine aquifer. And even though these are mid to high yield, that's a lot of water, and almost all of these communities are dependent on their groundwater. So that is sort of a sense, gives you a sense. I think I missed one, darn it. I have to go back. Okay, so the river, the glacial moraines, the bedrock escarpment, I think I missed that. So, in between talking about the moraines and the what we just saw with the aquifers under them, we also have, as part of the body of the Great Lakes, we have the bones, and those are these bedrock escarpments that define Western New York. And also other parts of the Great Lakes. So here is the Niagara Escarpment, this is the Onondaga Escarpment, and this is the Portage Escarpment. And then the Niagara Escarpment actually goes it goes like this, all the way up the Bruce Peninsula, across Manitoulin Island, and down Green Bay, and just west of Door County. And I've been there, my husband's from this area, and so I've been there to a place called High Cliffs, which is a park that's on the Niagara Escarpment. And I couldn't believe how familiar it looked. I didn't know that it was part of the escarpment when I was there, but it looked exactly like, Art Park or other places you might know. So it is the same formation that is really, I think of it as the bones of the Great Lakes. I think these escarpments have a lot to do with not only the shape of things, but also the health of the water. So post-glacial, bones, post-glacial circulatory systems, the hill made of water, and now we're on to part 2, which is a few slides talking about biodiversity in the headwaters. These photographs I took actually not on any of those tributaries we just saw. I took it on a tributary to Allegheny, and I will show you that. I think I just want to go back and show you where that was. So let's see, how do I do that? Oop. Okay, here. So here we see these escarpments, and here's Alleghenies, and all of this drainage is beyond the Portage Escarpment, is going north and west. Alleghenies is this is all drainage to the Allegheny River, and the picture you'll see when you see me behind me is from a creek there, and the pictures that I have of the critters in the headwaters, those are all from there too. So what I like to go there in the spring, and when I'm there, I always see these eggs in the water, frogs' eggs and salamander eggs, sometimes under ice, but still viable. And then aquatic insects, including stoneflies and caddisflies. Mayflies too, but I don't have any good pictures of them. But these are definitely caddisflies, and they're the most amazing little critters in the world, and I do have a chapter in my book about them because they are so amazing. They live for something like 2 years of their lives. They live underwater, and then maybe if they're lucky 5 days, 2 years underwater, and if they're lucky 5 days above in the air when they fly around as adults and mate. And they go through these instars in which they keep having their case-making caddisflies. So There's a little guy in each one of these cases, and the cases that they make are species specific. So this is all information I've learned from Wayne Gall, who did his PhD, I think, on caddisflies, and found out that indeed they are the type of case they build is species specific. They don't just pick up anything. And so here's another one, and you can see the case is completely different. I don't even know what it's made of. It looks like leaves and bones, but another case making caddisfly. So this means that those headwaters to Allegheny River in Allegheny State Park are very healthy. And they are. I've done a water quality analysis of all of the areas in New York State that for quality of water, and the highest quality water is in just a few places, and this is one of them. And another place is associated with the Tonawanda Seneca. So this one's associated with the Seneca Nation and also with that park, which is part of what's protecting this water. The other one that we have is near Onondaga, and that also is a highly clean water and protected by a native reservation nearby. So that begins the story about what happens to a creek when it loses its headwaters. And in this case, this is a little creek in Buffalo that is called Scajaquada Creek, and it's come into the Niagara River here. This is a picture. This is a map I made for my first book, which was Living Waters, and I tell the story of Scajaquada Creek there. Went there with my son and his little friend back in the day. I have to look up the year. I'm not sure. I would say it was around 2010 or 2012. And we went up here to find these springs. We didn't know they were springs, but we knew the headwaters were here because what we knew was this part. I mean, we live here, somewhere along here. And the drain is connected to the city sewers. I'll show you that. So we'll come back to that. Oh, no. My slides are strangely skipping. Okay, so this is Scajaquada Creek going into the drain. So there's the drain, and then here is where we will see it coming out. This is in the cemetery. And then all this other stuff is stuff that was built later, but I just think it's a funny photograph of a creek, what happens to it in a city with combined sewer overflows. This is what happens. Most of it goes here, some of it goes here, but in any case, it all ends up in the river, sewage or no. So we did our Earth Day cleanups along there. There was also a lot of trash, as you might imagine, thrown into the creek. And so we said, we've got to go to the source. We want to find it, and we want to see the good part of this stream. So we went here to this wetland. We found it on the map. Okay, it's got to be here. It's in Lancaster. And the day we got there, we saw this sign that said, "There, visit our model subdivision." So they were building a subdivision for like 700 units, and they were just at the point of bulldozing everything. And so we were there. I like to say we arrived at the source springs of Scajaquada Creek on the day they were bulldozed. And this is what they look like. They were artesian, pumping water out of the ground. We all put our hands in, and you could feel this pulsing. It was pretty amazing. I've never seen an active spring like that, and also these kind of unique ecosystems around them. I don't know what these things are, but it definitely looked different and unique. And so that happened, and we had hoped to find something better upstream or downstream. And there was a campaign for a while there to free Scajaquada Creek, imprisoned underground. It's going to be a big job, but there's a hidden connection to these to springs. So where it comes out, this is the end of that drain, and where the creek comes out, the overflows come out there, and what's left of the creek comes out here. And there's not much water, as you can see, and that's even a lot. Usually, oftentimes, there's none. So this is coming out of a stint of being 3.5 miles underground in this tunnel. And these are my colleagues at Waterkeeper, Carrie and Catherine and Emily. And we were doing an SVAP, which is a stream visual assessment, to say, well, how healthy is this stream when it comes out of the tunnel? And then I also repeated this with my son's friend, Mike Michelini, and there we are checking the dissolved oxygen. We checked it and the water coming out of the tunnel, and then just about, I don't know, 200 feet downstream, here's the Onondaga Escarpment, water's pouring over it. That's Skajakwata. It's amazing that it's got suddenly a lot of water, and the oxygen level is much better. And really that is in, I don't know, I'm gonna have to measure it, but we can walk from here to there in 2 minutes. It was an interesting experiment that there was oxygen in the river, even though it had lost its headwaters and gone through all that, been through the tunnel. And so to me, it's a very good story. It's about the redundancy of springs because, that's the other key thing. The reason why there's so much water in the stream is because this is a cemetery that it's ending up in. And that cemetery is underlain by 30 springs. And those springs you can see them. We walked the whole creek and you can see where they come in from the side. And they are the reason why a little trickle comes at the east end, no, at the west end of the cemetery, and quite a pour comes out on the other side, and all of that is the creek building up from its springs. And here, I don't know, this is really hard to see, but if you can look, these are rainbow trout. They're big. And they get up in this stream, they get up into Skajakwata from the Niagara River to spawn. And so they are just below here. There's a bridge, and right there, and just to the side of it, I think it's where the water is still deep enough for them to mate, and there they are spawning. I don't think successfully. I don't know if little rainbow trout come out eventually. But they have, I don't know, for the past 5, 6, 7 springs in a row, I've seen them there. So that's become a nice go-to place in the springtime. So that was a good story for me of the inherent power and natural recovery power for streams and for water. And thank goodness for that, because this is what we looked like in 1924. So this is Buffalo Harbor in 1924. And I would say this was more or less the state of the Buffalo Harbor for about 100 years, from maybe 1870 to 1970. Maybe this was probably the height of it, but it was, from the very get-go when the Erie Canal was completed and they knocked the sandbar out at the mouth, this became extremely industrialized, like one cannot even see hardly a tree. And so because this was happening all over the Great Lakes, that not just Buffalo, but the whole Great Lakes and especially the lower lakes, were industrialized. The Clean Water Act was passed in 1972, and the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, and both were dedicated to restoring and maintaining the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the waters, the nation's waters in the Clean Water Act, of the waters of the Great Lakes ecosystem in the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. 1972, it's always blamed on Cleveland and the Cuyahoga River burning, but this was things like this. This is how our harbors looked all over the Great Lakes. Oh no. Um, okay, so here, Buffalo River became this is Buffalo River, became an area of concern just because we had that legacy of industry. Toxic legacy primarily is what people thought about. But we were even in just the lower lakes, these two, not all five, we had 22, I think, 21 or 22 areas of concern surrounding these lakes. And Erie in particular was heavily, I think, the most heavily industrialized lake, as well as the Niagara River and parts of Lake Ontario. So Buffalo River really was one of those areas of concern. Niagara River was another. So in order to implement the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, there were remedial action plans designed by communities for each one of their areas of concern. And the first thing they did was determine a boundary. And in our case, this is the area of concern. So the Buffalo River was dealt with in terms of cleanup and restoring all those integrities as this last 6 miles of river. Not all of this. All of this was, but the DEC, bless their hearts, said we can't do anything down here. How are we going to restore habitat? I mean, it's all industrial. So they extended it, at least for biology, for the biotic integrity, to the first impassable barrier on each of the Buffalo River main tributaries, Cayuga, Buffalo Creek, and Cazenovia. And in so doing, they did inventories. They walked every one of these streams up to the first impassable barrier, sometimes a dam, sometimes a waterfall, and they took notes. What's there? And they found that of all the places they looked at, this little place right here, which is this little place right here, this oxbow wetland was the best. It's the first, as you get up maybe 10, 12 miles from the mouth of the Buffalo River, you come to this place, and it's a floodplain wetland. So that's a floodplain, 100-year floodplain color. And it has a lot of really interesting critters in it, which, again, I go into great detail. I have a couple chapters about this in my book, because this is where I learned. We say, let rivers teach us. This is what these rivers taught me. They taught me, number one, that you don't cut off a meander. So this was a deep meander on the river, which is full of them. Meanders are really important, not only to the life of the stream, but also to the life of the land. They aerate the land, and they slow down and stabilize the flow of water. And they have their own kinds of habitats and so forth. And when they cut this off, in 1950s, the creek immediately sped up and became dangerous. It was flowing through here so fast, it wasn't taking this long detour. So then they had to put in these sills, they call them, or low-head dams, and that's what these are, to slow the river down. And they became, this last one in particular, a death trap. So 5 people have died in the hydraulic boil that this is a little illustration of it that sort of sets up at that dam. But look, you can see how much floodplain here. This is the 100 year, this is the 500 year. There's a lot of floodplain here, and it's not developed because it was also prime agricultural soil, and so it was protected by farms for a long time. It's not protected, and so one of the campaigns I have on a back burner, but I'm always in it, is to get this floodplain protected, because the flooding, the people who are getting flooded now that this velocity has quickened, and all these people who live down here in the floodplain, which quite a few, even more than in this picture, do, it's a disaster. They have to be evacuated, and so this this whole channelization thing caused a lot of problems. So here I'm getting to my theme in this whole talk, and everything that I've been thinking about since I wrote that book is hidden connections. I have a lot of hope in hidden connections. So, you know, the hidden connections, like you saw on the map of the glaciology and physiography of our region, where you could see underground the X-ray how things connect. And it might, if you study that map, you might not be surprised when certain things happen, like you know, a well went dry, or you know, a pond suddenly filled, because you would see that, you know, there are these underground connections. But there are also species connections that we're not necessarily aware of. And so um, this is not the first impassable barrier on Buffalo Creek. That one's even farther up, a few more miles, and it's a bigger waterfalls. This waterfalls is near the Oxbow, and it's a place that we've been working at the Oxbow. We've gotten grants. We're starting in about 2007. I think we had about 5 years of federal grants. Maybe one of them was a GLRI, Great Lakes Restoration grant. I'm not sure, but you know, there was for the areas of concern, and luckily you know, they mapped it up to this far. There were grants to do protection and restoration of habitat, and so we had a lot of people over those 5 years come out to the Oxbow and mainly weed and plant. We weeded out invasive species and planted native species. We did a lot of that on this 30 acres or so that is the Oxbow. But for a break, we would always walk up to this waterfall and sit around. It's beautiful. And this is bedrock. This is the Scantiate and the Marcellus Shale meeting here. And one day, one of the kids, we had high school students with us who were doing the weeding and the planting, and we were told that they didn't even want to come, but they came. But when we got to take our lunch here at this creek, the whole class just came alive and, you know, had a lot of fun playing around in the water. And one girl found this, and that's her hand holding it, and it's a pocketbook mussel. And so I was amazed because, well, I didn't know that it was. I didn't know what kind of mussel it was, but I thought it might be just from looking at my books. But I sent it to the mussel experts at Buff State, and they said, yes, that's a pocketbook mussel, and they're locally extirpated. They don't occur around here anymore. And I said, well, I think they're in Buffalo Creek. So I wrote to the DEC and said, we found this, and I think other people must have found them too. And so the next time when they revise the list of species locally extirpated in New York State, and they do it for each region, I think they did it first in maybe 2005, and then in 2015 they revised it, and they took this off. So, you know, I think that says a lot. I think it says something about locally extirpated species. It's certainly possible, although I think a few others too came back and were taken off the list and of extirpation, along with the pocketbook mussel. But I also think people aren't looking, and there's not enough field people to, you know, to cover this. And so we don't know. I think there's a lot that we don't know. Hidden connections. And the other thing about this mussel is, and what makes it so special, besides that it's not locally extirpated, is it's what it does to reproduce. And what it does is it can fashion its mantle into a little fish, attract a smallmouth bass, which this river is full of, and when the fish comes close enough to bite, spray it with its glochidae, or baby mussels, tiny, that embed themselves in the fish and the fish's gills and so forth, and then they can live that way, getting oxygen and food by being attached to the fish until they're big enough to fall off and survive on their own. Apparently, it doesn't hurt the fish. and it's life key for the mussels. So that all becomes reason for thinking about making room for rivers. There's a little copy of my book that came out in August of this year, and a lot of what's in it came from following these creeks around and seeing what was happening, and then beginning to build these maps of what could be realistically to make room for rivers. We're not like the Netherlands. We don't have to tear everything down. We have areas that if they were only protected would make a big difference. And so we have, these are the areas there. It's a combination of floodplains and wetlands, which aren't that well protected, but they're supposed to be, and recharge areas, the ones we know of, and buffer zones. Some places have like 100-foot setback required for development. And nature preserves like Tift here and Times Beach. Those are both official nature preserves. By the way, the Outer Harbor isn't on this map because we were just looking at the river, so we'll get to that later. And native species, known and unknown, like the pocketbook mussel. So I'm transitioning now down the river down Buffalo Creek to the Buffalo River and out to the Outer Harbor. And I want to make the point that with the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement and the Clean Water Act, to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the waters of the Great Lakes ecosystem is something we're still struggling with. We cannot say that those integrities have been restored. And my argument, I guess, in my book, one of them is that of all those three, chemical, biological, and physical, the one that we've thought about the least is physical. With chemical, we got this we got the Speedies program that eliminates or at least reduces discharges. And with biological, we got the grants that allowed all of us to go out in the field and rip out invasives and plant natives. But physical, what do we do? There are things, federal laws that could protect things, but really physical integrity in my mind is key at the local level. And I worked as a regional planner, and that's where I started. And land use decisions are made there. So we have a local waterfront revitalization plan that calls for protecting, restoring, and maintaining. And I've added the word protecting to the Clean Water Act phrasing. But our LWRP, which was adopted in 2019 into law, it's in our zoning, which regulates land use. It calls for protecting and maintaining significant coastal habitats, and all these other good things. The food web, vulnerable species, natural flows, areas free of human disturbance, water quality. And so I'm maintaining, it was adopted in 2019, but to date is totally ignored. We have worked on a couple of lawsuits against inappropriate development out here on the Outer Harbor, and we've lost. And no one is quoting this this LWRP, as we call it, which is really a very ahead of its time document. I'm glad we have it. So here's what it is. It says Buffalo's waterfront should have a special zoning, and needs to be looked at very carefully in terms of any kind of any proposed development. And it has to be looked at in terms of the significant coastal areas, significant coastal habitats. There's 4 of them in the city of Buffalo: the North Buffalo Harbor, Times Beach, Tift Nature Preserve, and the Small Boat Harbor. And then there's like a little chapter on each one of those places and what's there. And what to do and what not to do in terms of managing it. It's pretty great. There's a lot of good material there. And it also acknowledges that our water intake is here. And in fact, the boundary of our local waterfront revitalization plan is the international boundary out in the middle of the river. And then it goes back, stops at the city line down here and goes in behind Tift to the railroad tracks and then up to the Buffalo River. So I'm interested, when I think about the coast, this is what I'm thinking of. Not the outer harbor is technically this little chunk right here. And many people have heard of that because we've been making a lot of noise about it for a while. It's definitely a contest. But really, the outer harbor, according to our LWRP, is 1,000 acres bigger. And it includes the aquatic side, which is really important because none of our zoning otherwise, or our land use regs, looks at the water. And yet that has everything to do with the biodiversity of this area. So it's a gateway to globally significant important bird area. And you can see these are the significant coastal habitats. And as you go up the river, there's more around Grand Island, at the other end of Grand Island, and so forth. And then you get to Niagara Falls is about here. Then there's a whole nother map for the lower river. But just looking at the upper river, if you can kayak around in here, and you will be amazed at what you see in terms of the bird life. And I know Birds on Niagara, some of you guys will see that this week. So it's recognized as a Ramsar wetland as well, and Jay and Jean Burney are both experts on this. And both of them are recognizing the unique biodiversity of this area. That's our heron colony on just off of Motor Island. I took that from my kayak. And there's a lot of heron. I don't know, I didn't count, but we have a pretty good variety of heron. We've got green heron and white ibises, I think they're called, and great blue heron, all nesting. I guess that's all by way of saying, they all need the water, of course, because they're all fish-eating birds. And so when we get this thing that's happening now in the Niagara River, which I'm going to go out this weekend and see, but we now have a lot of birds on the river, fish-eating birds that are flying north, and maybe here's the first time that they're getting to the fish that in the kinds of numbers that they need. And so one of the fish, and it's not the only one, but by any chance, but one of the fish is the emerald shiner, and Miss Alicia Perez Fuente-Taja. She has the Emerald Shiner Project at Buff State, and they've been studying shiners for at least 5 years. And they're worried that the populations are getting thinner, and there are a lot of thoughts about that. Climate change being the one that's the least in our hands locally. Pollution, we could probably do a little bit, but there's a lot going on. You just saw the sewer system kind of runs to this river. And now, by the way, we're north looking south back at the Peace Bridge. And loss of the food base, well, that's the emerald shiner, or maybe 90%. So that's a problem. And then physical barriers like this. This is on Bird Island, which is where there's a trail that begins, that goes out on the breakwall where you can see them. But it's, there's this armoring that makes it impossible, because I've seen the shiners, they follow the coast, and in the spring, they're heading this way. They're heading towards the lake in huge numbers. But when they get to places like this, they can't manage the currents. So they turn back, or they just sort of go into chaos. But that river of fish dissipates. You don't see it after a few stints like this. So it is a problem. Oh, and over harvesting. They're a bait fish. There is an immigrant population that makes fish paste and harvests them for that. That is what it is. But bait fish, people come from all over Pennsylvania, all over to harvest bait here because they're so good. But it's a big drag on the population. Um, Making room for coastal processes. So that's, I'm trying to, I think this is my last slide. Let me just see. Oh no, that's my last slide. Okay. So making room for coastal processes. I guess, that's what the subtitle to my book, Meander, is about, let the oxbow be, don't cut it off, and don't channelize rivers. And and then it's Meander, making room for rivers. It's really making room for coastal processes, because all of what happens in a floodplain and a wetland and an undeveloped coastal zone is good. It's, water cleansing itself. And this is a delta. This is the Buffalo River Delta, and it's been, you know, hugely modified from the get-go, 1825, when they removed the sandbar at the mouth to start the Erie Canal, and then built all of this land, none of which was here. This is all manufactured land, so that they could have slips and piers for the various industries that were here. And this is our confined disposal facility where much of the toxic waste has been put. So that's one way. The other way to look at it is it's also a lot of protected land, like that other map I showed you of the river. This one of the harbor, everything in green is either floodplain, wetland, or significant coastal habitat, or already a park or a nature preserve. And this is Tift, and there's Times Beach. So that's over 60% of the land in this version. And make room for coastal processes. There's a lot that could happen that would be good, given the fact that the lake levels are higher, the storms are getting worse, the seiches now come up all the way to the Furman Boulevard, running through here, breaking everything in their way. So we need to back off. We need to back off the coast, and we need to not invest a lot of money in building things out there. And we also need to remove or modify barriers to fish and wildlife, like that wall, that straight, wall for the emerald shiner. And to some extent, there may be some barriers within here. The biggest cause for Lake Erie's rating as the poorest of the Great Lakes on the integrity side is no coastal wetlands, or very few. The coastal wetlands, which it all was, have been taken up, used, cleared, dredged, whatever. Making room for coastal processes, those coastal wetlands are really important to the health of a lake. And so we're campaigning, and that's Jay and me, and our Outer Harbor Coalition and Western New York Environmental Alliance and a lot of other groups are working to get our officials to designate the Outer Harbor a park in support of natural regeneration of chemical, physical, and biological integrity. This a park designation rather than one development proposal after another is a good way to buy us the time to study it and see what needs to be done. So I think this is my last, and I hate to end on a sad note, but this happened on the Outer Harbor this year, right before Christmas, and the development company that's in charge and that owns this land now, this was how it looked when we went out there and photographed on summer solstice. It's this sort of southern end of their land down by Terminal B for local reference. And so there's that. That's a couple hundred regenerating cottonwood trees of all sizes, big and little, mainly there. And then here, this is a spotted bee balm, another thing that came in, total volunteer, and came in seeds from the dredge spoils that were dumped there. And there's thousands of them covering these sandy hills. So there's natural regeneration going on. But the ECHDC, the company that is in charge, they can't see it, and they call this a desert, a biological desert, and they had lots of reasons for taking it down, and they took it down. So here it was in summer solstice, summer solstice of this year, and here it was right after winter solstice. It's all gone. So probably one of the best things we could do in our next episode of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement and the Clean Water Act. This is their 50th anniversary for both of them. And everybody's rethinking, what have we done? Have we accomplished anything? Yes, and I think there'll be a lot of that celebration. There's been things accomplished, but we are always doing. We think we have to do. And I think the thing about physical integrity is first you have to understand how things work. And so maybe we need to do less and watch more. Because if we did, there might be one of the things that would be very interesting is to know how much these trees helped regenerate the soil, something we're going to try and find out. The soil that was bulldozed over to one side is beautiful, full of organic material, so it looks good. We should look to see, if any of the chemicals or hazardous things that are sometimes found in our outer harbor are in the soils at any kind of dangerous level. So do less, watch more. And that is the end of my presentation.